Welcome everybody, I'm Jeannie Rosner. I think I know most of you, there's a few that are new here, so welcome to those newbies. I appreciate you coming. So this is called Soul Food Salon. We do events once a month where we alternate between a talk here in the living room with a cooking demonstration in the kitchen. Basically my goal and my mission is to educate all of us and empower us to be healthier, and hopefully through the various content that we provide for you, you're going to be educated to be healthier. And recently we partnered with Stanford Medical School, and we're helping to fund their Teaching Kitchen course, which they basically have done 2 courses so far. We help fund the fall course, which is helping medical students, teaching them how to cook. And it's so valuable. I mean, I don't know about you, Daphne, and the other physicians that are in the crowd, but I didn't learn how to cook really until after I had children. And so it's teaching these students the importance of more plant-based diet, what different grains, different protein sources. So I've actually been helpful. Well, I've participated in some of the lessons with them. It's been fabulous. So we helped fund through Soul Food Salon, thank you, their fall class, and we are going to help fund the spring quarter for them as well. So we're probably going to do a couple other things with them going forward. So just be on the lookout for that. If you want to make a donation to that, you can. You can go on my website, which is soulfoodsalon.com. On the About page, which is the front page, there's a little link that you can click. So if you want to go back on some of the past events that we've had, just go on my website as well. Recipes are there that we've had. Presentations are there. I have a YouTube channel now. This salon is being videoed, so this will be up probably within a few weeks. So yeah, you could go on the channel and see everything. I'm on Instagram at Soul Food Salon as well, so please follow me. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce Daphne Miller. So I met Daphne, well, she doesn't remember this, but I met her at one of the Andrew Weil nutrition conferences, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Daphne was on a panel. At the end of kind of the conference, kind of the end, big feature is they do a case presentation. So they, have a 22-year-old male with whatever, blah, blah, blah. And they have a panel of different experts that are on to help chime in, like whether it's with nutrition or whatever there is to help treat this patient. So Daphne was on that panel, and she was fabulous. So when I started Soul Food Salon, I reached out to her, and thankfully we're now here 3 years later actually presenting. So Daphne is a family physician. She practices in San Francisco. She's in 2000, she founded WholefamilyMD, which is the first integrative primary care practice in San Francisco. She has written 2 books that we have here for sale. She writes for numerous publications. Her book, Farmacology, went on to be in a documentary, or the basis for the documentary. What was the name of the book? I meant to...
In Search of Balance is
right.
what it's.
So
don't love the title.
So I know a few of you have watched that.
It's on Netflix.
Yeah. So without further ado, Daphne Miller.
So good morning, and thank you, Jeannie, so much for inviting me, and such a pleasure to be here. And I was actually surprised. I know some of you from past lives, and really exciting to see all of you here too. I'd love to get a sense of who's in the room. So a couple of you came up and introduced yourself, but how many people are connected to wellness or healthcare or nutrition or personal training or something in some form or another? It seems there's a good number of you. Anybody in the room work in soil sciences or agriculture or with plants? We have a couple. Any serious home gardeners here? Okay, a couple more. So great. So we have a convergence of interests. If there really is a point to this talk, it's the fact that I do feel like people who are in the earth sciences and in caring for the soil and so on really have the same job as people who are health practitioners. We're kind of all jointly on the sort of forefront of health and caring. And hopefully that will come across in the discussion. But just to set the scene for you guys a little bit, this is actually still where I spend a bunch of my week, is in this room, which is a very sterile room, albeit it has a pretty picture on the wall, but it has the fluorescent lights and is not a place where you find a lot of green things growing. But over the years, as a result of first having spent a whole bunch of time writing about whole foods, nutrition, and so on, I started to become more and more interested in where our food is grown, and specifically the substrate that it's grown in, which is soil, by and large. As my friends started to describe me, they said, "You're starting to have really dirty thoughts." And what I started to become interested in was, what are the connections between our personal health and the soil? And so I started to ask this question from a medical or kind of scientific perspective of what are the links between human health and soil health? And being a doctor and being trained in science, I felt like the first rational place to go to start to understand these links was the medical literature. So I went to the premier medical research engine, which is PubMed. That's really where you go when you want to find out the links between different things in health. And I typed in the words soil health and human health as sort of my first, because the "and" is the linking word. You guys all know how to do searches. And guess what the first 10 pages of searches turned up in terms of keywords? So, these are where all the articles contained, were these kinds of words in them. Radon, heavy metals, pesticides, pathogenic yeast, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, tetanus. I mean, not healthy-sounding words. Definitely not words that describe any place that you would want to eat from, or put your hands in, or let your children play in. And yet, intuitively, this did not make sense to me. It's like there's more to the connection than that. I mean, this has everything to do with our sustenance, our well-being. At least this is what I'm telling myself. So I decided to go to the agricultural literature, and I put in those same words, and these are the words that came up in terms of all the key, carbon sequestration, different types of nitrogen cycling, nutrient cycling, water filtration, crop yield. We're getting closer here. But you read these words, maybe there's a couple of you who are a little more specialized, and these are really not take-home ideas that are going to help you improve the health, your health, or the health of the community in any obvious, actionable way, right? You don't know really what to go out and do with these terms. So it's like, we're getting a little closer here, but clearly we got a problem, folks. If these two worlds, don't even have the same literature, and they really aren't even coming up with research that can make a lot of sense to someone like me who's really trying to figure out what is our connection to soil and how can it keep us healthier. So I did the next thing that doctors know how to do well if they can't find something in the literature. I decided to do an internship. And so I headed out to work on a whole variety of farms across the country, really as a student, to start to explore this question of what are the links between our health and the health of the soil. And what I ended up finding out, just to give you guys the punchline quickly and then we'll backtrack, is that really at the end of the day, soil is like an accessory organ system to our body. It is as vital to us as our hearts and our lungs and our kidneys, and as irreplaceable to us as these organs. In fact, I have come to think of soil as the ultimate mega organ. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that right now. So are you up for the journey? Up for the discovery? Okay, the first idea that I want to convey is this idea of soil really as our digestive system, okay? It is kind of doing a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to our own personal digestive system. And the folks that taught me this lesson originally, and then I learned it over and over and over again, were this couple who run a biodynamic farm in Washington State, and they're Eric and Wendy Hawkinson. They're an amazing set of farmers. But they have an interesting story in that they weren't born into farming. You know how some folks, their parents were farmers, their grandparents were farmers, you were just born kind of knowing what to do with your land and taking care of the land. They weren't like that. In fact, Eric had gone to Harvard Divinity School, and then he decided he wanted to be a salmon fisherman, and he moved up to Alaska. And then he realized that the only true calling, from his religious training was to nourish his community. This was an epiphany he had. So he bought this acreage in the Snoqualmie Valley near Seattle, and his plan was to grow these beautiful, nutrient-dense fruits and vegetables and serve them to his community in the form of a CSA, community-supported agriculture boxes, and nourish his community and keep them healthy. But he had one big problem, and that was this land that he'd purchased, the soil was in terrible, terrible shape. It had been in monoculture for years, so they'd just grown one form of grape over it and just, kind of hadn't replenished the land. And then it had been fallow for a whole bunch of years, not grown on at all, and kids had been riding dirt bikes over it. And if you know anything about soil, the most important part of soil really is the top couple inches. So when you take a good dirt bike with those nice nubby tires and zoom it over soil, you send all of that nourishing layer into the river. So his soil was completely depleted, and he needed to bring it back to life because his fruits and vegetables were looking anemic and sickly because he wasn't growing them in good soil. And they were testing anemic and sickly as well. So he went to the conventional agronomy literature to try and figure out how to replenish his soil. And what the literature was telling him to do is something that's called test and replace, which as a physician made perfect sense to me, because what you do is you go out to your soil and you stick the soil in little test tubes, you mark where it's from on the land, and you send it to a lab. And then the lab sends you back a report that tells you what's missing in terms of nutrients, mainly minerals, but even some vitamins from the soil. And then what you do is you buy bags of the stuff and you dump it back in the soil and mix it in, and that's the replace part, test and replace. As a physician, this made perfect sense to me because that's what kind of we're taught to do with our patients all day, right? Oh, they come in, they don't feel so good, you do the blood work, oh, your calcium's low, your iron's low, your, this is too high, your vitamin D is low, we'll give you this and this and this, and, kind of treat you like this little plot of land and dump bags of nutrients back into you. So he's telling me this story, and it made good sense to me. And then he told me the next part of the story, which kind of made good sense to me too. He said, you know what? And I would retest my land each season, and the numbers would get a little better, but then they'd just go bad again the minute I wasn't buying the bags of nutrients. And I was on this total treadmill of just buying this stuff. And he said, and the worst part of it was that I started to realize where the stuff was coming from. And we only have a finite amount of minerals on this planet. So where do you think this stuff is coming from? It's being mined from countries where they need those nutrients way more than we do. Parts of, Southeast Asia and West Africa and so on. So it's, this kind of robbing from one part of the earth to give it to another. And then he started to also be concerned because, even though this was organic production, all of these bags have a little warning sign on them that says, wear a mask while dispersing these. It's like, what am I doing to myself? So he decided that he was using the wrong paradigm. It wasn't that he was buying the wrong nutrients, he was using the wrong paradigm. And he completely switched models of farming. He went back to the books And he started to read the writings of both traditional farmers from around the globe and also very famous organic farmers who had studied with traditional farmers, people like Lady Balfour and Rudolf Steiner and Sir Albert Howard and people from the Rodale Institute and so on and so forth. And what he realized is that all of these folks, whether they were doing eco-farming or permaculture or biodynamic farming or full-cycle farming or whatever you want to call it, all these labels, what they were all really doing was farming in the image of nature. They were actually farming the way that nature farms when you let her do it on her own, okay? Now, how does nature farm? She always includes animals. Mm-hmm. What else, when you see nature farming successfully, what does she do?
She drops her leaves and leaves her leaves.
She recycles everything. She doesn't stick them in bags and send them off somewhere. Mm-hmm. What else, how does nature farm?
She accommodates different seed germination cycles.
Exactly. She farms in season with what's local and available or brought in by the birds or the wind or that just works within that ecosystem. What else?
She allows things to decompose.
She allows things to decompose. Does she plow? Does nature plow? She always leaves the ground covered with something. Even if you go to where nature is farming in the middle of the desert and you go on your knees, you see tiny little plantlings there. She conserves water, she conserves nutrients, everything that you guys have mentioned. When the wood dies, she leaves it, to rot. And it turns out that she probably is the most successful and most abundant of farmers in terms of this model of farming, even when compared head to head to lots of our very industrial models. So Eric basically converted his farm to one of these full system. He called it biodynamic, but as I said, it can have many labels. And he continued to test his soil, and what happened was that things completely changed, both in terms of the nutrient content of the soil, but then he did bricks testing on his fruits and vegetables, and the nutrient value was through the roof on them too. So by converting to this model, and all of a sudden he was saving money and time because he was doing it in this very much of this full system model. And if you were to get on your knees in Eric's farm and see the difference, the before after in one of his fields, this is what you would see on sort of the soil level. What do you see here as the difference between the two?
The soil looks richer, not like so.
Do we have any dermatologists in the room? I always love it when I have a dermatologist in the crowd because they're like, I didn't know I was an organic farmer. But they're able to read that as a healthier piece of land because in fact our skin, when it's healthier, looks like that too. It's not shiny and bare. It has more variability in terms of the texture and so on, in the pores. And even the hair growth, believe it or not. So, but yes, exactly. There's more variability in the plant matter. But if you were to pour water on these two, which one is more likely to absorb it? Yeah, you just get this sense of health, and you don't need to be a farmer. And then if you go underneath the soil on that one on the right, this is what you see, is just an incredible abundance and diversity of bacteria and fungi and so on, and worms. And then if you were to go onto the DNA level, and we're really geeking out here, and do something that's called 16S RNA, which is a way of tagging the microbial life within the soil and looking at the diversity of DNA, what you see is everything above that blue line is a distinct type of microbial DNA in that recycled soil, versus everything below the blue line is what you see in conventional soil. And this was a study that was done in Washington State. So what do you see?
A lot of diversity alone.
A lot of diversity. The interesting thing is, in terms of sheer abundance of bacteria, conventional soil is not so far behind a lot of this more, regenerative or biodynamic type soil. It's just that it's all the same kind. It's incredibly homogeneous. Does that make sense to everybody? So it really is diversity that seems to be the difference. And then when you start to measure nutrient content, and this is where it really starts to make a difference, you see this was done from that last study. This was comparing the same varietal of strawberries, so that you're not comparing apples to oranges or strawberries to oranges, you're comparing strawberry to strawberry, and actually the same type of seed, so there's no confounding there. And what they did is they put one in this regenerative plot and one in a conventional plot, and even in the first year, the strawberries that were grown in the regenerative plot had 10% higher in all these nutrients. And it turns out with each year, and I haven't updated this slide, it gets more and more and more as the bacterial diversity grows. So literally, that soil and that abundance of diversity of bacteria is acting as an accessory organ, giving you a higher nutrient content in the foods that are going into your gut. Does that make sense? Because they're actually digesting stuff from the plant material. And what's so interesting about this to me is about 10 years ago, a researcher at Stanford, Dina Bravata, she might be a friend of some of yours, very successful researcher, published a meta-analysis of looking at organic versus conventional and came to the conclusion that organic farming doesn't produce any more nutrients than conventional farming. Is that anybody remember when that kerfluffle and it was see organic? Well, that was a meta-analysis where you take all these studies and mishmash them together and compare. But this is what happens when people in healthcare don't speak to people in agriculture, because if she'd done the comparison of not organic, because organic's not the right label, because there's plenty of monoculture organic. If she'd actually looked at this kind of full system of farming, because Eric, when he started out, he was organic, but looked at the model he turned to, which is this diversified model, and compared that to conventional, she would have gotten a very different answer. And when you guys are shopping for healthy foods, it's not the organic label per se, although that is sometimes a useful guide, but it really is how the soil is treated that matters so much. And this is actually just showing you on a sort of microbial level the relationship and how basically you have to have this whole diversity of bacteria in the soil for each one of them to do their little job of harvesting the nutrients and passing them on to the plants. It's this very diversified, intricate dance, and if you're missing some of these bacteria, you don't get the nutrients. It's that simple. And in fact, the bacteria work in this lovely lock and key relationship with certain types of plants to harvest certain nutrients. So like when you're growing pomegranate, you need a lot of azobacter in your soil because that's actually really good at harvesting the manganese and magnesium and zinc and iron and so on, and passing it on to the pomegranates and making them the nutrient-rich plant that you want them to be. And if you're growing lettuce, you need glomus, which is something else. So there's a lot of complexity there, and the soil, by creating this abundant life, is actually taking care of it. Because the more diversity you have, the more you're upping the ante that you got the right bug to do the job, right? And so that's not the only way it turns out that this diversity is interacting with our digestive system. There's also a direct DNA swap that's going on that we're just beginning to understand. And Justin Sonnenberg, who's also at Stanford,
his wife.
Yeah, did she come and talk? Did she talk to you about this? About the bug that they found that lives on seaweed that's really, really good at digesting seaweed. And what they found is that over probably decades or maybe even centuries, who knows, people who are eating a lot of seaweed are actually getting this specific bacteria as part of their own microbiome. It's taking up residence there and making them especially suited to digesting seaweed. So we're constantly exchanging. That's an aqueous, example, and I think of the ocean as the aqueous alternative to soil. But there's probably a lot going on between, the places where our plants are growing in our own digestive system, this kind of crosstalk that probably is also really important for our nutrition. And so if you're eating from dysfunctional soil that's giving a lot of information about antibiotic resistance and so on, because it's been treated with pesticides and so on, that's the info that's going to get in there, So there really is a direct DNA conversation. So I will let you guys decide which one of these you want to do the heavy lifting when it comes to your digestion and where you want to get your nutrients. So the next part of the mega organ complex I want to talk about is soil as an immune system. And this lesson was given to me by Cody Holmes, who is a rancher. He's actually in the Ozarks in Missouri. And not only did I spend a couple weeks working with Cody on his ranch, but I was so impressed with him and so fed up with my teenage daughter at the time that I sent her to work on his ranch, and he really whipped her into shape. She's now in her early 20s and in much better place, but if you have any problem children, send them to Cody. And if nothing else, they'll be too exhausted to give you any trouble by the time. So Cody was born into ranching, fourth, fifth generation, Missouri rancher. But in fact, his farm was doing so poorly, his ranch was doing so poorly that he had to take a job off the ranch as an accountant or a bookkeeper because he couldn't make ends meet. He was a conventional rancher, buying all these inputs for his cattle, all these growth hormones and feed, because part of the winter it's in snow there, and antibiotics and dewormers and vaccines and you name it, and he was buying it. And he had an ethical problem. The story for all these farmers who converted to a different model was, at the end of the day, it was their morals that got the best of them. They were all going broke, but it actually wasn't the finances that made them change. It was the moral piece. And what was happening to Cody was that each year when it took time to take all his calves and stick all these chemicals into them, he was taking one calf and putting it aside and growing that one chemical-free, and that was the one he was feeding to his own children. And he realized that there was an enormous inconsistency there. And so he went back to the books and started reading about these much more integrative forms of ranching. People have, once again, many names for calling this kind of ranching, from rotational grazing to mob grazing to, he calls it bison-style grazing. I don't know how many of you have visited Tomcat Ranch in Pescadero, but it's a model that they've taken up. And the whole model, how I was talking about how nature farms, this is how nature grazes. And basically, if you were to watch a herd of animals, be it bison or elk or what have you, in an era and in a place where they were allowed to roam freely, what the bison did, in the middle states of California, was that they would move in these enormous herds, many thousand of them. They would just destroy the land. That's what it would look like anyway to the casual observer. Get rid of all the forbs or the cover with their hooves, ground their poop into the soil, and then move on and destroy the next place. And they would do this over hundreds of acres, and they wouldn't come back to that original spot until everything had regrown, right? Because then it would be ready to feed them again. Well, that is actually a very healthy thing for the land. As they're destroying the land, what they're really doing is waking up all the seeds there and fertilizing them at the same time, and then moving on, okay? And they're acting a little bit like weed suppressants, so they're keeping things in balance. And so what these farmers like Cody started to do was imitate the bison, but they did it with electric fencing that they could move every day, paddock-style grazing, where they would take 1,000 head and stick them in this little 1-acre lot and let them destroy it, and then move them on and rotate them through, you know, with Cody, it's 1,000 acres, 1,000 cows on 1,000 acres, and they don't come back to that first little paddock until it's, you know, rejuvenated again. And not only has this been shown to improve the land, it's actually been shown to increase the carbon count in the soil. So remember that soil sequestration part? And it's been, you know, shown to, you know, have all these benefits. But what really interested me in Cody's story of doing this is he said once he switched to paddock-style grazing, all the illness in his animals disappeared. Every season, the calves would get what is kind of the equivalent of a really bad influenza and really bad upper respiratory infections and really bad gastrointestinal infections, like different kinds of digestive diseases. And he would spend all this money on the vet. So not only was he not spending money on all the chemicals, he wasn't spending money on the vet anymore. In fact, all he was doing now, his only job consisted of moving these little wires around once a day. And he was starting to train his herd and breed his herd so they could eat through snow. So he wasn't even spending on you know, grain in the winter. And so as Cody was telling me about the health of his cows, he said, you know, I've gotten healthier, my kids have gotten healthier, and it's all because he got on his knees and he pointed down to the soil, and he said, it's all because I changed the soil. And I was like, okay, sounds great. I kind of believe you, but I'm a little bit of a skeptic. And so I decided I would actually go and spend time with a researcher who's looked at this. And so, folks, we are soil, and this is something to be taken very seriously. So I've now gone on for over an hour. Any questions or thoughts? And if any of you read Korean or Mandarin, Farmacology has just come out in those two languages. I have boxes of them and I don't know what to do with them in those two languages. So just let me know and I'll ship you some.
So questions?
Yes.
I have a question about the allergies. What about families where it seems like the allergies are kind of going through the family, like inherited almost? Is that all because you're living in the same environment and you're growing up? Or can you combat that with the storm effect too?
So I by no means want to suggest that this is the only mechanism by which allergy occurs. And in fact, there is a really strong genetic component. I do want to suggest that for people who have a strong family history of allergy, certainly you can mitigate that or improve things by taking this relationship more seriously, in the same way that being exposed to a lot of, sort of this kind of homogeneous microorganisms and so on can make allergies worse. So it can be a two-hit phenomenon. In the same way, there's just people who are really resilient to allergies who, it doesn't really matter, what exposure they have. I'm sure you've had other speakers who've talked to you about the relationship between breastfeeding and early diversity of exposure to food and so on, and that also being protective in terms of allergies in children. And we now understand that even in the uterus, that we used to think that the uterine, environment was, the amniotic fluid was sterile, but we now understand that there's a microbial exchange that goes on there. So, moms having, this exposure to healthy soil, eating a diversity of microorganisms, being in environments that have, a whole diversity of healthy foods, all of that can play an important role. But, there is some suggestion that you can reformat your immune system as you get older as well. For people, who have been long sufferers, it's not too late for you. And really interesting situations where people have moved into more diverse environments, and they tend to suffer for a while because their immune system, kind of doesn't know what to do with all these exposures, but then that actually tends to normalize. And I don't know how many of you have done oral, the SLIT, Sublingual Immunotherapy programs that are now finally available. If any of you have allergies, it's under that same theory that sort of microdosing with a diversity of these antigen exposures can actually improve your tolerance to them, or decrease your overreaction to allergens. Yes.
How realistic is it, though, to be able to really follow down a lot of our food products to how they're produced, like the coconut milk, for example? And the reason I ask that is I did some research on, I have a pot scrubber that's made out of crushed walnut shells. So I was thinking, oh, this is awesome. It's not plastic, it's blah, blah, blah. So I called the company that distributes it to find out about it. The president got right back to me. He had no idea where they got the walnut shells, how far they were, what the carbon footprint was. So I take that over to a food product. And sometimes it's hard to find out.
So first of all, I want to totally applaud you for doing that. That is amazing, because most people don't. And that's the kind of thing, like you gave this guy pause.
Well,
he did. Yeah, no, for sure.
To me, that this head of this, organic product company, quote unquote, didn't know.
I was in this consumer packaged good conference with all these people who are buying this products, and they all do it through some, middle person aggregator. And what it really takes is consumers demanding to actually understand the history of their food. And it's like, what's more important than that? I mean, there's so much that, choice that's being made to save pennies on the dollar that's actually destroying an ecosystem in Brazil, or actually maybe even one much closer to you. And so, the easy answer is, to kind of take it the other way and only buy things where you actually really do know where they're from. And there's a lot of products that we buy that have all these ingredients in them that have been prefabricated. They're absolutely not necessary for your survival, time efficiency, or well-being, I might argue, and are not cost effective. They tend to be a lot more expensive because value added to food is messing with it, and, just adding more junk. It's selling the carrots is not a good moneymaker. So I encourage you to have that be a little bit of an indicator of, oh, do I really need this item? And if you really are into it, engage with the producers and find out more. Yeah, I'm going to take this in.
I came upon a very interesting information when I was looking for a container of milk. The man from a farm was delivering, this is a local farm, was delivering the milk, which was more expensive than even the organic milk that I normally buy. And he was explaining to me that, this is a delivery man, and he's explaining to me that this milk is only pasteurized once, not twice, because they do not deliver it out of the area. And so consequently, they don't have to pasteurize it twice. And he explained about the pasture-free cows. And, it was just a coincidence that was, I think, Strauss Farms. It was just And he said, and we make ice cream too.
Yeah, and it goes bad much faster than the conventional stuff as a result of it, because it actually is in its original form. I don't know how many of you know what happens with homogenization even more than pasteurization. And what's unique about them is they don't homogenize. And so pasteurization denatures milk a little bit in that it actually changes the chemical bonds, but what really changes milk is homogenization, where they take it and they move it through these pistons super hard and super fast, and it breaks the bonds, and what it does is it diffuses the fat micelles throughout all of the milk, but it also takes the protein in the milk, which is nice and tucked in and protected from these fat micelles, and disperses that everywhere. So it actually makes it into a technically more allergenic food, because the protein is kind of out and exposed. So, these things, these labels you read and you're like, what does that mean? And it just makes my milk last longer, all by homogenize. It's actually doing something to the chemical nature of the product. So, yes, there's a question here, and then yeah.
So I have two questions. One is, so I'm a big shopper on, let's say, Good Eggs. And I trust that their farmers are vetted.
Yes.
And they are following more or less the line of Farmacology that you're talking about.
If you shop on Good Eggs, you're 90% sure you're getting amazing stuff. So
that's sort of what I wanted to ask, because it's very hard.
Yeah, they do an amazing job.
And
in fact, I put my Good Eggs order up for the week for my patients to see, which I know is incredibly silly. But I try to encourage them, but Good Eggs is really expensive. I mean, it's really, really pricey, and there's a lot of privilege that goes into being able to shop there.
Local farms that have a box or...
Right, and there are ways to do it more affordably, but Good Eggs is fantastic, yeah.
And then one more question. When you were talking about the mitochondria vacca,
the Mycobacterium bacteria. Yeah, it's actually related to the Tuberculosis Bacterium, it's another Mycobacterium, but yeah.
Could you address whether or not there's a way for us to incorporate that into our own soil or into our own chicken coops, or if we can buy it, and any way? That was very...
Do you have a piggyback question, or... Yeah.
Basically, it's just reducing the number of steps. So when you're thinking about if you're cooking food, if you're making chicken noodle soup the way your grandmother made it, it's going to be great. If you're buying it maybe from Robert's, a little bit less great for you. But by the time you get it in a can, so what you want to do with all of this is reduce the number of steps. So you can go to Cove Farm, Sunday morning, Menlo Park Farmers Market. You can buy the carrots that are going to have a little bit of dirt on them, including some of this bacteria. And so when you eat that carrot, it's like potatoes, not Prozac, right? If you're actually ingesting some of this. Mm-hmm. If you buy the Cove Farm carrots from Good Eggs, it's just one step away, still great, but it's going to be a little bit cleaner. And by the time you're buying an organic carrot from Whole Foods, forget about it. They've actually treated it with chlorine. So reducing the number of steps in all of these.
Wow. That's a wonderful answer. And really, in general, the closer you can get to soil yourself, the best is to grow yourselves. I have a tiny little wedge of a hillside garden in Berkeley, and my friend Maria, who's sitting back there, who I've known since our older daughters, who are, 22, something like that, were 2 weeks old. We met in one of those mommy baby exercise classes, where you don't know what to do with yourself. And you just sit there and nurse in the back of the class and don't really actually exercise at all. But Maria she lives in Vancouver, but she's on sabbatical this year and is down here. And we took this garden, which has the worst soil in the world and was mainly growing ugly ornamentals. And we spent, the past couple months just doing the lasagna or sheeting method and literally changing the soil in my yard. by we got point raised compost, which is this beautiful compost that all the Strauss cows make. And you do layer upon layer of, collecting leaves from the neighborhood and mulching and so on. It's a lot of work. My hands are kind of destroyed. And you literally grow soil and rejuvenate the land that you have. And I'm just getting to the point where I'm starting to plant right now. And it's just so rewarding because the plants get in there and they're like, whoa! And it's so that I'm not gardening like Eric started out. I'm not buying, the bags of nutrients and the fertilizer and so on. It's just, you keep up this cycle and it just gives you this incredibly rich, microbially diverse soil. And you can do it on a 5 by 10 plot area. There's a wonderful book on urban permaculture called Gaia Gardening, Gaia, by Toby Hemingway. And there's another one on urban permaculture by a guy named Chris Shine, who's up in the Bay Area, Shein. And these books will teach you everything you want to know about weaning yourself off herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, monoculture, and ornamental gardening, quite frankly, which I think is beautiful. But, why have all these plants that can't feed you? Tear up the lawns, tear up the shrubs, and start growing food. And you can make beautiful year-round gardens.
I've got a question about autoimmune inflammation. It seems like it's really expanded, or I don't know if that's true. But
yeah, that graph I showed you, yeah.
Is that with the toxicity in the earth and what we're eating in our bodies, or what?
So once again, I'm always really careful to assign everything to one cause, but that what I was trying to show through that figure of the loss of biodiversity on the planet and the increase in all these autoimmune diseases is that there seems to at least be this incredible pattern of association going on. And now that we understand the mechanism, that's at the root cause of a lot of autoimmune disease, which really is this, dysfunction in your innate immunity, something, that happens where you don't get enough exposure to a diversity of organisms in utero or early on, it really is starting to make sense. I mean, we're living in these kind of bacterially sterile, homogeneous environments. And the more that you can do to shift that out in your microenvironment, the better. Hence the gardening and so on. So, yes.
Curious, I'm a gardener, and maybe you would glean this from the farmers that you've worked with. So one of the struggles that the master gardener community has is that we're constantly being told to add nutrients through compost and such to our soils, but we're not supposed to disturb the soil to dig it in because of the soil structure. But then we just have this guy come and speak to us and do a lecture on how much of the nutrient content of a compost will be lost if you don't dig it in.
So that is not at all what the permaculture technique shows. Basically, what you do is you just add it on as layers each year, and you have to mulch like crazy. So my neighbors all love me because I'm the leaf lady for the entire neighborhood. Maria and I both. We've been like wandering around with our rakes and stealing leaves from everybody. And I'm like, don't bag those, leave those. And now my neighbors are like, wait, do I want those leaves? I was sending them to the dump for years, but now maybe that you want them, I want them. So I've been getting.
If you go to your local school, think about all the leaves there that they throw in.
I know, it's just, and that stuff is gold. I mean, it just, and so I just put in two. Like the holy grail is in Berkeley. You cannot grow avocado, but I've just put in an A and B avocado. You need to have a kind of girl-boy and boy-girl to grow them together. And I gave them the most ideal environment. You're going to have to check in with me in 2 years to see if I've beaten the odds. But they need to grow in these massive mounds of mulch. So I literally was hauling bags up the stairs, and I've created a mountain from an avocado mountain. You know, and I was thinking, if I went to the nursery and bought all this mulch, this would be like $40 worth of mulch right here that I just got for free down the street. But you do have to mulch in layers. And then the idea also, a lot of permaculturists don't even compost. What they do is they take the banana peels and the cuttings and so on, and they just stick them in one of the layers nicely, so they just rot. The soil is so bioactive, there's so many worms and voles and bugs in there that you don't need to do the compost system. You don't want to do a dump of trimmings in one place because it will rot and smell. But the idea is that you put them thinly in the layers, and you don't even have to. It's the no compost method. So the soil actually just digests it itself. But obviously that doesn't work on a massive farm, level. And then, I've just planted fava, so I'll have green compost, and all these, because you need to put nitrogen back into the soil in different ways. So, it's the other thing I've realized is that farming well is not for the lazy of mind. It is definitely harder to be a farmer than it is to be a doctor. And so that's the other thing. It's given me total respect for the profession. Oh my gosh, and they get paid so little. It's really hard to do well. So. Yeah, there you go. I know. Oh, Fitbit. I've been wearing my Fitbit. This is the last plug for gardening. You know how it goes crazy at the 10,000 step mark? Like I'm out there, I feel like I've barely done my hour of gardening, and all of a sudden my Fitbit is like, ding, you've done your 10,000 steps for the day. I'm like, you're kidding me. All I've done was plant this avocado tree. And yeah. So. That's the biggest plug for it, is you definitely, that's your workout for the day. Yeah.
That's a question. So when I go to the farmer's market, there's one stand there, all they sell is strawberries. So that would mean by monoculture?
Well, I would ask them. Have a conversation, and you can do it in a way that's, I don't know, if I see all you have is strawberries, what's wrong with you? Just say, your strawberries look really great. Tell me about your farm. I'd love to hear. What else do you grow? What is your, yeah.
Is that what you mean by?
Yeah, if it's just strawberries and how many acres, I'd be like, do you grow other things that you don't sell? Because sometimes farmers do only have one production, but they're actually growing a ton of other things that they're using to enhance the soil as cover crops and so on. So yeah, I mean, that can, sometimes happen. I always say, what else do you grow? Do you intercrop, which is another important question to ask? Do you always keep the ground covered with something, Do you use green manure? What is your watering systems like? That's another big part of it, are they conserving water? And yeah. So, and if the more farms you can visit, it turns out that farmers are actually, as long as you're not doing it, once again, in a judgmental way, but really doing it as a learner, most farms that are selling to humans and not, just for animal feed are really happy to have humans. They usually actually on their website have farm days. They want people to learn, In fact, they do those ridiculous pumpkin and bouncy house days a lot of times because they want people to come to their farms, not because it's a big money maker for them.
Are the microbes in this soil the same microbes that populate our digestive system?
So the simple answer is no. The more complicated answer is that as I was trying to describe, is that there's probably a lot of exchange going on. We've sort of co-evolved with similar types of organisms. So if you look at the families of organisms, they're the same. But when you look specifically at that species, it tends to be different a lot of times. But as I gave the example with the seaweed one, there are either codons, or either segments of DNA that are the same, or in some instances they really are kind of these twin species. And, obviously the distributions are different, the percentages of each and so on. But what's very clear is that we all started off as worms, because, worms basically cycle soil through their gut and have biomes that are incredibly similar. And, and as we specialized more as humans, they did change and differ. But there is a lot of crosstalk and a lot of exchange of codons that goes on. Swapping out a piece of the cassette. Does that make sense? Like a splice. Yeah.
So how can we help you spread your great news? And so we don't have to wait for the USDA to spread this information?
Well, pharmacology was meant to be a spreader, a manure spreader. One of the projects I'm working on now, and definitely looking for collaborators, both in terms of both financial support, but more so in terms of a little bit of a starting committee brain trust, is this project of really trying to build a collaboratorium for human health and soil health. And I'm on faculty at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley and also UCSF, and involved both at the Berkeley Food Institute and in the medical school there. And the institutions have absolutely no money for this right now. There's just no funding mechanism. They're, unlike Stanford, they're completely broke. But there's an enormous amount of interest among the students trying to figure out ways that they can do this crosstalk education and really be the first generation of professionals that are health literate and soil literate and really starting to do research in this area. So I've been talking to a bunch of folks. I don't know how many of you know Sally Calhoun at Piscinus Ranch. She's both a philanthropist and a soil investor down here who has a big experimental ranch. And she and I are starting to hatch some ideas about, should this be an institute? Should it be a course to start off with? How do we change the whole way that academia thinks about this? And really move health providers upstream. It's great they're doing the culinary stuff. How do we move them to soil? And how do we move the agricultural folks into health so that they're not growing just for profit or for soil health, but are growing for human health as well, and really understanding how that happens. So it's really kind of creating a whole new discipline. And like many new areas, it's a little hard to. I was talking to Maria on the way down here how I've been at this solo for a long time now, with lots of people who ask me to keynote and get very excited and blah, 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 but really trying to figure out how to start to get the next generation involved and move this into truly an educational enterprise that changes the way we think. I am looking for plenty of great ideas and collaborators. And if you're good at making movements and ideas and things happen, please contact me. I would be delighted to work with you.
Can we feed the world organically? My husband and I get into argument a lot.
So I'm going to just give you different language for the question. Can we feed the world without having a ton of chemical inputs in a high carbon, high fossil fuels, externalized system? Because that is really what you're asking, right? Because remember, we talked about how organic, yeah. So really, is there a sustainable farming way to feed the world? And the answer is a resounding yes, that the literature has now shown over and over again. And it's not just these touchy-feely, agricultural journals from the left. If you go into the conventional literature at all, it's there everywhere, how in fact, it's called conservation farming is the term that's often used. And there's tons of research in very mainstream journals. It's been published by UC Davis. It's published by the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Administration of the UN, and so many. Yes, it is the only way we can feed the world. But what's happened, like so many things, is because industry has such an enormous interest in selling us chemicals that there's a lot of confusion out there. Just the same way it's still hard to figure out what foods to avoid even though you kind of know. It's hard for us to figure out how to grow in a healthy way because there is lots of corporate interest trying to obfuscate the issue. It's really quite simple, and there are examples, and I visited them all from all over the globe, of fairly large communities that are just bucking the system and saying, Monsanto, Syngenta, Bayer, all of you folks, no more. We're not buying, no more. And switching over and using local seeds and conserving soil and educating their children and recycling their nutrients and all of the things, and farming with animals and not having monocrops and feeding their communities. And we're, believe it or not, the US is doing more poorly than most nations in terms of agriculture now. We started off, I'm sorry for any of you who can trace your ancestry back to the Pilgrims, but we started off as lousy farmers. We made it this far because we had thousands of acres that we could destroy and move on. The Dust Bowl was an enormous crisis of soil. What did farmers do then? They moved out west, and then they started doing the same system here. The soil was a little better here, so it's taken them, almost, over 100 years to destroy it here, but we're losing our soil here. I mean, along the Mississippi River right now, and I went and visited a research project that's being done by agronomists there, they're losing 10 tons of soil per second along the Mississippi River. Do you know what that looks like, 10 tons of soil? It would, fill, I don't know, this room several times per second because of bad farming, because of the way the land has been distributed, because of the watering practices, washing it in. For all these different reasons. So that what was this fertile crescent of the U.S., this fertile river, is now just, that's why the Mississippi is full of mud. It's healthy soil that has gone in there. I mean, there's parts that boats can barely pass through. That is soil being lost to the river. That's us losing our sustenance. And that's happening across this country because we actually refuse to see what's going on. So. This is where these industries are based. It's home base for them. So they're all pharmaceutical companies, by the way. They're not agricultural companies. They're not selling seed. They're selling chemicals. So, yes.
The good news, it'd be the change that you want to see, and that's what you're doing, and that's why we're here, and I applaud that, because years ago we would never even be gathered here listening to you.
Absolutely, it's wonderful news.
So integrated medicine, I'm seeing that more and more, and I work in that arena, and I see that as being one of the cutting edges that can incorporate this whole movement. The disappointing thing is when I look at television, I see pharma ads constantly, and they want everybody on a statin, which is just poison. And so our goal, I think, is to push back against pharma in terms of being the groundswell that we want. And it comes in all different forms. It comes in the form that we're here to listen to you talk about, your publications, and are spreading the word. So I applaud this, because this is allowing the independent physicians that are out there to do more in the integrated area. And I think it's so good. So thank you.
Amen. All right. Thank you guys so much. It was really a pleasure. I guess I'm going to sign books for a little tiny bit. And thank you guys so much